With the Resident Evil 2 remake running wild in 2019, many people are hunting down every last copy of the original to purge it from existence, with the consensus being that it's the inferior version in every conceivable way. But is that really true? Or does classic Resident Evil 2 have a few things that the remake doesn't? Well, fear not, cause I'm here to help determine which game's better, all things considered. Although it is a little bit tricky, cause sometimes hype over a newer game can cloud people's judgment, only for everybody to change their minds later on. This happened with the GameCube, Skyward Sword, and, well, even the classic Resident Evil games to some extent. However, nostalgia's also been known to make people think just as irrationally as hype. So with me being somebody who's beaten the original Resident Evil 2 literally dozens of times on multiple consoles, as well as currently being obsessed with the remake, I decided it's best to rid myself of both nostalgia for the classic and hype for the remake by traveling to Capcom's year of 2000X. Cause if I don't even know when the hell I am, then nostalgia and hype shouldn't be an issue. So pour yourself a glass of milk, stop ignoring your uncle's pleas for help, press the subscribe button if you haven't already, and allow me, the world's most average-sized man, Cameron, to compare the Resident Evil 2 remake with the original with as little nostalgia and hype interfering as possible. You might think without nostalgia involved that this should be an open and shut case for the remake, but to be honest, I don't think the classic Resident Evil 2's aged as poorly as people think. One of the main complaints people have with the original Resident Evil 2 is the tank controls, but to be honest, I straight up think they work. And I'll even go one step further and say that they're actually good within the rules that the classic Resident Evil games established. Don't get me wrong, tank controls would be awful for pretty much any other game that was ever made, especially in the modern day. But the older Resident Evil games were completely built in a way where it makes sense, and once you get used to it, the awkwardness completely goes away. And if people can consistently beat the older games in like an hour with just a knife, then you can't tell me that the controls are unreliable or don't work. To better explain my point, look at Castlevania 1. It feels weird that you can't adjust your momentum in the air because you're so used to being able to do so in every other game. But since the game was built to accommodate these physics, I wouldn't call it a bad game. And I look at the tank controls in the classic Resident Evil games the same way. So I think that people who didn't grow up with it just aren't willing to get used to it. Which is fair, because despite the fact that I'll defend the tank controls of the classic series up and down, I definitely prefer the controls of the remake, mainly because aiming at weak spots is just more fun than pointing your weapon in the enemy's general direction. But one major gripe I have with aiming in the remake is that headshots do the exact same amount of damage as a body shot. Sure, there's a chance for a critical hit, but aiming up with a shotgun in the classic games always resulted in a critical hit. I'm not shunning the remake for enemies being strong, but it's a universal rule that a zombie's weakness has always been being shot in the head.
Either by putting a bullet through her brain, or by decapitating her completely.
If 1 to 2 headshots killing zombies would have made the game too easy, then they could have just added more zombies. Despite headshots not really being that important though, there are certain enemies like the mini G monsters in the sewers where aiming's pretty crucial, and that makes this a huge improvement from the original game. But since the original was made 20 years earlier, pretty much everything in the remake's bound to be better aside from the voice acting, but that goes without saying.
Wow, you look so sexy, Lisa.
I also really like how much better the story in the remake's told as well. I'm not gonna delve into spoilers, but everybody dies in the end. Just kidding, but everything with the story in this game just makes more sense, like there was actually some thought put into it. Plus, the characters are either more likable or dislikable. But the remake's biggest strength, and what makes it stand out from not only the original game, but other modern games as well, is the amount of horror. And let me tell you, this game scared the shit out of me, especially with headphones on. Every time I ran every possible lock combination, I'd have to constantly check and make sure nothing was sneaking up on me with all the creaking noises I heard. Yeah, that's right. My step-uncle Ricky raised me to be the type of person to guess every possible combination. Because when I play video games, I like to behave like I would in real life for the most part. And I'm sorry, but if I'm stuck in this type of a situation, I'm taking an extra 3 to 5 minutes to make sure I'm as prepared as possible. If you two didn't feel like waiting to find the actual combination, then let me know in the comments below. When I say the remake's scary though, that's not to say the original games didn't have genuine scares though, especially for the time it came out. But the main reason why those games were so scary is because of the fixed camera angles, which unlike the tank controls can suck my left ass. Sure, not always being able to see where you're going made the older games scary, but fixed camera angles often led to cheap shots from enemies you didn't even know were there. And according to my gynecologist, that's shitty game design that's best left in the past. Even though I thought Resident Evil 1 was much scarier than the sequel thanks to hunters being much more of a problem than the lickers, Resident Evil 2 had Mr. X, and my memories of him popping up at the most inopportune times are legitimately some of the scariest moments of my entire life. And that's coming from someone who's seen Val Kilmer's sex tape. Because I was in it. In fact, Mr. X left such an impression on me that I actually dressed up as him for Halloween one year and absolutely nobody knew who I was supposed to be. Sadly though, I didn't even take one picture, but this artist's rendition's pretty damn close to how cool I looked. As scary as Mr. X was in 1998 though, his presence in the 2019 games absolutely fucked. First of all, instead of only appearing in the second scenario, he pops up in the first right when you thought you had the hang of things. It's basically the game's way of taking your training wheels away. Plus, in the original, he'd only appear at predetermined times, but in the remake, he just constantly stalks your calcium deficient ass after the first encounter. And before I understood how to properly deal with this, I was so scared that for a second, I actually questioned whether or not I'd be able to finish the game. Not because I thought the Tyrant made the game too difficult, though. I may impatiently guess lot combinations before finding them naturally, but I'm certainly not a big enough jabroni to complain when a game's actually difficult like some people do. That being said, though, with the Tyrant wandering around while I'm playing the game at 1 AM with headphones on, I had to reach down pretty deep to find enough testicular fortitude to keep on trucking. The Tyrant in the original Resident Evil 2 was a pain in the ass, but at least you could put him down and pick up a little bit of ammo for your trouble. And not only that, but you were safe after you got out of the room you encountered him in. He never followed you around or anything like that. In the remake, though, he just keeps on following you, and yeah, you can outrun him, but you're gonna cross paths with him eventually, and you can only temporarily stun the big bastard. So you pretty much just have to accept the fact that you're gonna deal with having to hear those constant footsteps and slamming doors. And on top of all that, he walks way faster than he did in the original game, especially with your character's dad hustle. Seriously, who would ever jog this slow in this kind of a situation? And to make matters with the Tyrant even worse, he's drawn to gunfire, which makes fighting other enemies way harder. But during my first playthrough in both scenarios, my hands were shaking the entire time I was dealing with the Tyrant. Like I said, I like to immerse myself into games as much as possible as if I was actually there. And since I was so immersed in the Resident Evil 2 remake, this is the most scared I've been playing a video game since Resident Evil 0. As scary as things got for me though, the balance was always just right to where I wanted to keep coming back for more. Every time I turned the game off to take a break, I couldn't help but plan my next route out of my head, and I ended up jumping back in within minutes. Oftentimes causing me to stay up late as shit, because the tradition in the Cameron household is that Resident Evil games must be played during the night. With all the praises I'm singing about the remake though, it probably sounds like I'm in the camp of people wanting to erase the original from all space and time. But I've gotta say, while playing the remake's first scenarios were enough to blow my fragile little mind, the second scenarios felt a tad lazy compared to the original. Like, why is meeting the other character in the police station the first thing you do in the second scenario? In the first run, you didn't even see your counterpart till a decent bit into the game, since you actually have to make your way to the police station. In the second scenario though, you just start off at the police station. So it feels like Capcom skipped developing the beginning of the second scenario to get the game out on time. And not only that, but you pretty much do the exact same thing no matter which run you're on. The original game had different bosses depending on whether or not you were playing Claire or Leon A or B, with the second scenario's bosses usually being more difficult. The only real difference with the second run in the remake though is that there's less ammo. But the game already has a difficulty setting, so I don't really see the point in playing the game 2 more times, whereas the original kept all 4 playthroughs a lot more fresh. It may not seem like a big deal to some, but it's major enough for me to feel like that Capcom just viewed the remake as something that just needed to be done, whereas the original felt like they put their heart and soul into it. They even scrapped the original game and started all over because they weren't happy with what they had. Reshuffling the deck up a little bit would have made the remake better in every conceivable way. Some people are complaining that the spiders, crows, green lickers, and the giant moth aren't here, but to be honest, I don't really give a shit. Besides, the alligator fight was done perfectly, but I'm not gonna spoil it here. But as far as the remake being too difficult though, I really don't see how people could say that with games like Celeste existing, but I think Dreamcast guy's thoughts on the matter sum it up perfectly. So if you watch that, tell him Cameron sent you. But I bring difficulty up because I think it's yet another thing the remake did better. The original Resident Evil 2 started off difficult, but as long as you weren't an idiot about your ammo, you were pretty stocked up by the end of the game. And not only that, but the bosses got easier as well, whereas the remake gets harder the further you get. But again, the game never gets too hard. So I think it's pretty obvious that while I'm nostalgic as hell about the original game, and while I think it was more impactful for the time it came out, the remake's just better in every way except for the second run feeling lazy like the developers just didn't understand the point of it. Despite that though, Capcom remembered everything else that made the original great, and they improved upon anything that needed it, like how much scarier Mr. X got, and they left things alone that didn't need to be touched, like the game's relatively short length, which is my biggest fear about the remake. And if you ask my fat ass, I think the Resident Evil 2 remake proves that there's a place in this world for shorter AAA releases, and that not every game needs to be 80 hours long as there's replayability. And despite the second scenarios being lazy, the short length makes it justifiable to keep playing the game. But for anybody out there who still prefers the original Resident Evil 2, don't feel like you have anything to be ashamed about whether nostalgia's a factor or not, because I'm definitely gonna replay the original at some point in the future. Probably not anytime soon though, since we just live streamed it. The Resident Evil 2 remake may have improved everything, but it's still in fact a completely different game, almost to the point where it's not even comparable. It's like comparing the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies with the new ones. Sure, the original's cheesy and doesn't appear to be as polished in the modern day, but plenty of people still have a soft spot for it, and that's just fine. But what's even better than just fine are the absolutely amazing badass legends who support us on Patreon, like the patrons of the day, Austin Garcia and the DLC guy. So if you want to consider joining this Hall of Fame for loot boxes and silly rewards, then go ahead and check this channel's Patreon out, or you can show some support by picking a t-shirt or Kickstarter coffee mug up, and if you send pictures or videos of you rocking the merch, then you can appear in videos like this mighty fine human being right here. How do you compare the Resident Evil 2 remake to the original though? Do you have an overall preference? Or do you hate both games and want me to continue making Nintendo videos? Either way, let me know what you think in the comments below, and as always, I'll pin whatever I find most entertaining or intriguing. Don't forget to subscribe if you're a sexy beast who likes being pandered to and in slates. And if you like and share this video, it'd go a long way to help the channel grow. My name's Cameron, and I'll see you next time.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.